video on YouTube, but you picked mine, so I'm not going to make you regret it. Today, not only am I going to show you how to install these coilovers, but how to pick them apart and service them to make sure that they're in tip-top condition before you put them on. Alright, let's get after it. So here is a set of MCA suspension reds, really high quality coilovers. They retail for thousands and thousands of dollars online, and I picked them up used on Facebook Marketplace for 1,300 bucks. Nothing wrong with them, they don't leak, there's no damage on them. I mean, they're practically brand new. They're made with really high quality materials, they're engineered to a really high tolerance, they're serviceable, they're upgradable, and they're made right here in Australia. So, perfect, right? Wrong. These things are completely wrong for my car. And I mean completely wrong. So, how did I get this so wrong? What did I do to get this so wrong? I'm going to tell you this story so that you don't make the same mistake I've just made. You see, MCA Suspension is a highly specialized suspension company, and what I didn't realize is they sell several products for this car. Street setups, you can get circuit racing setups, dirt for stands, and these have been customized for circuit racing. Now, if you know anything about this project, this is a budget street build. What that means is this is going to be a street car. Circuit racing coilovers are not going to work. What's going to happen is this car is going to ride terrible on the street. You see, the spring rate in these is very, very high. The valving has been set up to be very, very stiff. So these might win you some races on the track, but they're going to be absolutely awful on the street. I found some serial numbers and I've sent those serial numbers to MCA, and I've had a conversation with them, and sure enough, they confirmed that these do not suit my needs. So, word of advice to all of you guys out there, before you buy a set of coilovers, just make sure you know what you're getting. So what can I do? Well, MCA told me I can have these rebuilt, so they could revalve them, change the springs, give the whole thing a complete overhaul so they suit my needs, which is a street setup. Here's the rub, that's gonna cost $2 grand. Or I can do option 2, which is slap these back on Facebook Marketplace, sell them to someone who needs a circuit setup, and do what most people do and buy the most common set of coilovers for a street setup. What's that? That's a set of BC Golds. So that's what we're doing here. We're putting BC Golds on the Rexy, not these. Okay, here are all the tools that I use to get this job done, including servicing these coilovers, not just install them. So have yourself a jack and some jack stands ready. Get some wire brushes for cleaning, have a paint marker to mark your camber position, have a torch ready to see in those dark spots, a measuring tape to measure the ride height, a ratchet and extensions, have a 5mm hex socket ready, a 10, a 12, a 14, a 17 and a 19mm socket, have a trim removal tool, have a pry bar, a torque wrench that goes to about 160 to 200 Newton meters, have a pick, an impact gun will be really helpful, have a 14, a 17 and a 19mm spanner, some lubricant to undo those tight bolts, a hammer for persuasion, the C-spanners for the coilovers, and finally get yourself some work gloves. These are lightweight, stretchy, flexible, breathable and cut proof. The link is in the description below. BC Racing. So if you're into tuning cars, obviously BC Racing coilovers need no introduction. These are a fairly generic set, really good for street setups. They get the job done. Are they MCA suspension reds? No, not even close, but they're definitely not terrible. They've proven themselves over many years on several different cars, so for this budget street build, they're going to be absolutely perfect. Now, as you can see, these are also a set of used coilovers. What we've got here is actually a set of STI BC Racing coilovers. Now you might be thinking that won't fit the car. And that's correct. STI coilovers will not fit a WRX. But the previous owner has thought of that, and actually these are the original bottom hats that were on these coilovers, and as you can see they say STI. But what the previous owner did was wind those bottom hats down and put a set of WRX hats on the bottom. So now your STI coilovers will fit on your WRX, and really that's probably going to be the only difference between an STI set and a WRX set of BC Racing coilovers. It's these bottom hats here, and let me show you what I mean by that. The spindle on the car is a different one on the WRX compared to the STI. So these mounting holes are in different spots. They're wider on the STI and they're narrower on the WRX. So he's changed those over, and it just so happens that the bottom hats for the WRX match the Forester, hence why there's a sticker on these that says Forester, but they should go on this just fine. So besides that, there's not much to point out other than that they are used. So before these go on, what I'm going to do is pull them apart, make sure that they're not seized before I get to installing these. And to check that, I'm going to basically unbolt everything and clean everything. So that's a bonus for you in this install video. I'm going to show you exactly how to take this entire thing apart. Bottom hats, all the rings, the spring, the shield, the pillow ball, the top hats, everything. I'm going to remove all of this, give it a good clean, make sure nothing is seized here before these go on the car. So let's do that now. Alright, so I put this mat down because I want to show you that despite the fact that this coilover is practically clean, all the stuff that's going to come out of here, so this mat's going to be able to show you that really well. Obviously always protect your hands. To start with, we're going to remove this hardness adjuster on the top of the coilover. So this adjusts the stiffness of the shocks, and to remove this all you need is a 14mm 1/4. Just give that a crack and this whole thing will come off like that. So when you have the little damping adjuster taken off and safe, just flip this around, and we're going to undo the adjuster on the spring over here. You're going to need your C-spanners. So line these up on the cog over here. 1, 2, and it's the bottom one that we need to crack off. There we go. So once that's loose, just check that your threads here are nice and clean. So I usually like to just take a pick of some sort and go around and then grab a brush just to make sure that these threads aren't going to force this ring to bind up. Alright, so I'll wind this one down to about there. Okay, so at this point the spring is loose. We can undo this top nut. To undo the top nut, you take a 17mm and a 5mm hex to hold the middle, and then just undo the nuts. Or if you've got a ratchet gun, that also works. Okay, so with that nut off, the 17mm nut off, you'll be able to take this pillow ball off. This is your top mount. And at this point, we'll be able to take the spring perch off, the top one. And now you should be able to slide the spring out. And there is your hat that protects the strut shaft. So this is just to protect against dust, and within it you will find your bump stop. Okay, All right, so at this point, you've got your 3 rings and you've got the bottom perch here as well. Now you got to be careful here, make sure that all your threads are nice and clean. This will be full of brake dust, all right, not just mud and dirt, but brake dust as well. So clear this out as much as you can to make sure that your thread does not bind. If you ruin this thread, you've ruined the strut. So I'll take the spanner and loosen this off. So there it goes. So now what I'm going to do is wind this up all the way to meet this ring over here. So as I do that, you can see how this ring is cleaning itself over these threads. These used to be nice and clear like this, but because I'm winding this up, it's leaving all the dirt underneath on the thread itself. You see the difference, the color difference? Now that I've got these rings locked together, I'm going to take some silicone spray, and just to help me as much as possible, I'm going to wet these threads in here. Let it soak for a bit. All right, so the aim now is to get this off. So I'm just going to hold the strut with this spanner. I'm going to take a hammer and try to pry this loose. Now you can hear how stuck that was, but with a little bit of perseverance, you can unseize this and wind it off. There we go. So that's the bottom mount off, and you can see why these things get seized so badly. Basically, all of the dirt from your tires and the brake dust, which is really fine iron particles, settles within these threads and it binds up the thread. So before I undo these rings, I'm just going to clean these threads up. So take a look at that. This is all coming out of these threads. So now that that's looking in pretty good nick, what I'll do is undo these rings. So I'm going to wind these rings down this way, and I'm going to check that the thread is okay all the way along. I'm checking that they're clean and that the rings aren't binding up at all. So there we go, there's your shock absorber. Now I can still see that these threads, especially up here, are quite dirty. So I'm gonna spend a little bit of time cleaning up these threads now. Here it is, everything is exploded. These are all the parts that make up your coilover. So you've got your strut in the middle that everything branches off of. You've got your spring, all of the locking rings and top and bottom perches, etc, etc. So I've gone through and cleaned up all of this, and now I'm ready to put it back together. Before you do, do an inspection. So obviously you've just cleaned the threads, so make sure that they're all good to go. I've got a little bit of damage just there, but I'll be winding from bottom up, so I'm not too worried about that. This is a great time to make sure that your shock absorber or your strut is not leaking. This seal here is what determines whether this thing is seal tight or not. That's the strut and it's good to go. The threads are good. At this point, check your spring as well. Make sure that it's not cracked or that there isn't any rust forming that will compromise the strength of your spring. So that's all good. I've got my bottom and my top spring perches there. They're all nice and cleaned up. I've got my top mount here. I've separated the pillow ball and the top mount into two bits. I've cleaned both sides, inside and out, so they're good to go. We've got our dust shield here, which is in really good condition as well. The bump stop, we've got the two locking rings, and we've got the bottom mount just there. And I've also cleaned all the threads inside of this to give me the little chances possible to having this thread lock up again. So we're really good to go. The next thing is obviously to put this whole thing back together. I'm going to do that now, and I'll show you how to do it in case you also want to do this at home. So let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my bottom spring mount and attach the plastic sleeve which the spring sits on back onto the ring. What I'll do is I'll wind this locking ring back onto the strut first, and this should go on very easily now because everything's nice and clean. The next thing I do is I'll mount the bump stop back on, and then I'll take the dust boot and I'll put it onto the shock. Next we'll put the spring on, and with the spring just bear in mind this number here has to face the right way around when you put it on, so that number should be facing the correct way. So at this point we can put all the top mechanisms back on. I'll mount the plastic sleeve back onto the top spring mount, just like that, and I'll slide this in like so. Next I'll reassemble the camber plate and the pillow ball mount, so just put that back in position like so, and I'll take my 4 screws and just wind them in loosely for now. So with that on there like that, I can slide this over the top, and I can take my top nut and start winding this top nut in. So with that top nut now in place, I can take my 17mm spanner and my 5mm Allen key and basically wind this nut back on completely. So 17mm and 5 goes in the middle, like that. And just wind this down. This is a nylon locking nut, and it will bottom out. When it does, just make it snug. You don't need to over tighten this, just make it nice and snug. Alright, so that's bottomed out there. Just going to give it a really good, so that it's snug. And that's probably good just there. Okay, with that on there, we can take our adjuster and thread it back on. So this will bottom out. So again, this is a 14mm and just needs to be snug, doesn't need to be super tight. There we go, that's probably good. Just test the action. Okay, good. Everything's moving nice and freely up here. So we're good to go down to the bottom. So at this stage, I'll just wind the bottom spring perch up so that the spring is captive. Just stops it from wriggling around too much. Next, we'll attach the 2 bottom rings. So there are these 2 rings. These 2 rings are the same size in terms of diameter. The way you tell the difference between them is the height of them is different, and one's got a taper down the bottom of it. So that taper sits in this taper on the bottom perch like that. So you know that the thicker one goes with the bottom perch, so that goes on last. So the next ring that needs to go on is this one over here. Next we'll put the bottom ring on. And finally the bottom perch. So the tapered side goes on first. Okay, so what I like to do is wind this bottom mount on until it's sitting flush. Can you see that? So I wind it past just a little bit so you can tell. So that there is the bottom of the strut. So I like to wind this and stop when it's sitting absolutely flush, which is right about there with the bottom of the strut. So the bottom mount and the bottom strut are flush at the base over here. And then I just wind this back down and just loosely lock it in place so it can't move. All right, I'm not tightening anything up yet. This is going to be the adjusting point for your ride height on the car, and just to make sure that all 4 coilovers are sitting at exactly the same height when I install them, I like to use the bottom of the strut as a placeholder. If I know that the bottom mount and the bottom strut align on all 4 struts when I install them, I know that they're all at exactly the same ride height. So I can use that as a really good and level starting base and go from there basically. So essentially that's what I'll be doing with the other 3 as well. I'll be lining these 2 up, and then that way I know that all 4 coilovers are sitting at the same height at the first installation point. The only thing left to do here now is basically set my spring preload. So what you do is, let's loosen off the locking ring, so the one in the middle for now, and wind the bottom spring perch up into the top perch as far as you can go with your hands. So just wind this bottom perch up until you just can't wind it anymore. So yeah, that stops right about there. So then what you do is you put the bottom locking ring hard up against the bottom spring ring. Then you take your C-spanners and basically set your preload. So the way to do it is, now that these are tight, you're going to wind the bottom spring ring up until there is a gap between the 2 rings. And the gap that you need between the 2 rings is the width of your spanner, your C-spanner. So basically just wind this upwards. And as you go, check this gap. So it's not quite there yet. Not quite there yet. Not quite there yet. There it is, right there. So I now can slide this spanner into that gap, and it's, you know, it's in there nice. It's not too loose. So this preload is pretty much set. Essentially, that's all you got to do with BC coilovers. So the last thing to do is to wind this up hard against the spring, and take your 2 spanners and lock this up. There we go. So there we go. The preload on this spring is now set. I've got the bottom mount here sitting flush with the strut, so I know what height I'm at compared to all the other coilovers, because they'll all be set exactly the same. So this thing is pretty much good to go. Now the reason I go to this extent with used coilovers is because I've taken this thing apart. It is squeaky clean, so I know that when I put this on the car, I'm not going to encounter any issues with anything being jammed up or locked up due to all the brake dust and the mud that was on the threads. I know that every ring I can loosen, I can tighten, I can move up and down. I know that everything in here is in really good condition because I've checked it, and I'm confident that these will go on the car without any problems now. All right, so that's kind of it with this. I've got 3 more to do, and I'm not going to put you through the pain of watching me do 3 more. I'm basically going to get to it, and I'll come back to you when those are done as well. And that's it. I've got them all refurbished now. They're all just sitting down there. I've actually already done one of the fronts while you weren't looking, just to make sure that I know what I'm doing when I'm making this video for you, so that you can see what to do. So I've got the bonnet open because we're going to need access to the top strut mounts over here. And the first step will be to jack this thing up and take the wheel off. So this is where we'll be working, and this is really easy to do. Well, the fronts anyway. The rears are a little bit trickier, but they're not very hard at all. If you watched my last video where I swapped the CV axle, you'll be familiar with these two bolts over here. So we'll be undoing that one and that one. Obviously this top one's a camber bolt. It's already been marked from the last time I was in here. Other than that, there's 3 bolts up the top, a couple, one over here and one over here. So I'll undo the brake line. And on the other side here, you've got your ABS sensor. So with these two loose, I'm going to loosen both the camber bolt and the bottom bolt over here. So both of these 19mm bolts are now loose. Obviously I've taken out the camber bolt already. The only thing holding this in place now are the 3 strut bolts up top. So let's get those out. So you're going to need a 12mm to get these undone. Sorry about the weird angle. I just wanted to show you this before it goes in. So your coilover has a camber plate on the top, most likely, especially if you've got a BC like this one. So what you're going to want to do is position this camber plate to slide laterally like that. So not front to back with the car, but side by side to the car. Other than that, fairly straightforward. So let's pop it in. So now it's simply going to be a matter of putting these 2 bolts in. Just align your camber bolt as best as you can, remembering where the mark is supposed to be. Now obviously you're getting a wheel alignment after doing all of this, but just try to put it roughly in the position that it was in. And for me that was right about there. Check it, about there. Tighten the bottom one too. The only thing left to do is reattach all your ancillaries. So your brake hose, there should be a mounting spot on your coilover for your brake line. So, and lastly, you've got your wheel speed sensor, which goes on here. Now here's a note for you. If you mount this the correct way, just put the bolt in to show you. So if you mount this the correct way, what I found is this coilover, where this mounting position is for this wheel speed sensor, it doesn't leave a lot of slack for the wire here, and I'm actually a little bit concerned about this wire being stressed and stretched when the wheel turns. So the solution I found is if you turn this around like this and mount it this way instead. Obviously this bracket's not doing anything anymore, but that doesn't matter because this bolt's doing all the work anyway. But if you do that, look at this, you've got a lot more give. So when this wheel turns, you've got less of a chance of this wire fraying or tearing. And you've still got heaps of leeway on this end as well. So yeah, check it out. So this side, if you mount it this way, you've got this much room, whereas if you mount it this way, you don't have a lot of give. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm basically going to flip this like so. And just mount that there like that. And I've still got lots of play, everything still clears, and I'm just a little bit more confident that this isn't going to get fatigued or stretched or anything like that. So yeah, just a little tip in case you're worried about your wheel speed sensor as well. But that's kind of it. That's how easy it is to put the coilovers on in the front here. The only thing left to do is torque down your bolts. So you want these at 155 Newton meters, both of them. And finally, these top bolts don't need to be tight at all. 20 Newton meters is plenty. You know what? I'm not liking that. I might just give it an extra 10, I reckon. No, I'll give it an extra 5. The torque specs is 20. I'm making it 25. Just to be on the safe side. Okie dokie. Okay, and finally, it's time to set your top camber plate. So this is going to be very dependent upon your wheel alignment and how much stance you want or what sort of handling you want. I'm going to show you where I'm going to put it for now. Obviously I'm getting a wheel alignment, but this is where I'm going to set my camber plate for now. What I'm finding is at this setting, the front wheels are tucking in enough so that I don't have any fender rubbing. And obviously once I'm done here, I'm going to a wheel alignment shop anyway. But for now, this is where I set my camber plate. So in the center here, you're going to find a 0 character. So I'm assuming that is 0 camber. And what I'm doing is using this pinhole here to set 1, 2, 3, the fourth line here. I'm assuming that's 1 degree and that's 2 degrees negative camber. So I'm just going past 1 degree negative camber there. I'm assuming that's 1 and 2 degrees. I'm not really sure, but I am finding that that is tucking my wheels enough to avoid any fender rubbing. So it's the 1, 2, 3, 4th line from the center 0 mark there. So I'm going to tighten these down. And that's all she wrote. That's the fronts done. All right, let's move on to the rears. So with the rears, you're going to start in the boot. We're going to remove the boot liner here to access the top of the struts. There are a couple of bolts we need to undo. 1, 2. And with those 2 bolts undone, we're ready to get started underneath here. So this is what we've got going on. This is the bottom bolt for this entire strut assembly. So once you remove this bolt, this is loose and can come out. But before we remove this bolt, we're going to need to swing this arm out of the way so that this thing can slide out. This bottom control arm needs to come down, which obviously means this bolt also has to get undone. To get this bolt undone, we also have to disconnect the rear sway bar, so that's going to be that bolt over there. And also, if you've got a leveling sensor, you need to undo that bolt as well. So let's get all of these undone. I'm pretty sure these are going to be 17s. Whew, that's tight. Looks like I'm going to have to break out the big guns. The next one should be a 14, so 1, 4. And the last one is a 10. There we go. All right, so that's loose, that's loose. This is under tension, so we're going to need to just support it a little bit to be able to slide these 2 bolts out. There we go. And she's out, yes. Okie dokie, so time to feed the new one in. So obviously this goes up here, but before you put it up, to align this bolt with the lower control arm, loosen your bottom ring, feed the bottom in first, and then just give this a push downwards, feed the bolt in. There we go. Okay, so before we get these bolts tight, the next thing we're going to need to do is raise up this control arm to get it to ride height, because we need to tighten these down when the control arm is completely under duress, so that when you lower this car and these are tightened, what would happen is all of the bushings in here would twist when they sit level. So we're going to raise this control arm up now to get this control arm to set level, and then we're going to tighten them down to avoid tearing all the bushes. At this point, I've got this lower control arm up as high as it will go, but this strut is still a little bit loose. So what I'm going to do is adjust this ring upwards until the nuts down here, the mounting bolts, bottom out against the plate up there. So all I'm doing is I'm grabbing the small C-spanner and I'm rotating this upwards. So I'm rotating it clockwise, which will push this spring up into where it needs to be. This top collar is how you adjust your ride height now. Okay, I can feel that that's nice and snug now. So at this point, I'm just gonna lock this bottom ring in place. So we've got the ride height set for now. What I'm going to do is measure the distance here, and I'm going to set the other coilover to match this, so that when I do the other side, we've got the same ride height to begin with. Obviously, this isn't my final ride height, but it's just set like so that I can tighten up all the bolts and do what I need to do in order to get the wheel back on the car. Once I drop the car, I'll come back in here, I'll check the ride height and adjust these if I need to for a final time. All right, but for now, it's time to tighten up these bolts. Oh, after we put the top bolts in. So let's do that next. 1, 2, so we just put those on. And we're gonna torque these two down to 30 Newton meters, 30. Okay, so now that everything is tightened up there, it's time to button things up down here as well. And then that's kind of it. We'll drop the wheel and check out the ride height on this thing. So let's torque these bolts down. Again, with the trailing arm under load, by having lifted it up with a jack stand, I'm going to torque these down. I'm going to start with this outside bolt here, so that needs to be 80 Newton meters, 80. This one is also 80, so this is 80. The sway bar end link bolt is a 14 millimeter, and we'll put this back to 50 Newton meters, 50. Okay, and then the 10 mil at the end, the leveling bolt, just give that 20 Newton meters. There we go. So with everything tightened up down here and the initial ride height set, everything is torqued down upstairs, we're now good to get rid of this jack. Beautiful. So one final check over everything, make sure that nothing is binding or snagged, everything looks good, everything's nice and tight. I think it's time to put this wheel on. $30 mil, so 10 more than the front. Yeah, I think I'm gonna leave it there, let things settle for a day or so, and then I'll adjust as I need to. Actually, you know what? No, I'm gonna drop it So I want to get this gap to 35 mil. I'm at 40 now, so 5 more. Almost there, couple more mil. Perfect. All right, let's see if this has done the trick. 25 mil. So that's pretty good. I'm gonna let that settle for a week, but yeah, that's better. Okay, last one. You know the drill by now. Boot up, trim out, undo the top bolts, take the wheel off, do all the bottom stuff, torque everything down, measure, wheel back on, put it down. Happy days. Yes, my dudes, she's sitting pretty nice now. Well, I think so anyway. So tell me what you think, comment below. Have I got the ride height just about right? Would you set this thing lower, higher? What would you do? I've got it set up for handling mostly. I want it to sit low but also take a corner really well. And oh yeah, she takes a corner a lot nicer now, I can tell you that. She's a little bit firm. I've got it set up right in the middle in terms of soft or firm. Everything, all 4 corners are sitting right in the middle. But I think the fronts on these need to go a little softer, so I'll adjust the fronts a little bit, just soften them down. But all in all, everything else I think has worked out really well. And I hope you agree. I've shown you how to install these, how to set the ride height, how to adjust the camber plates. I've even taken them completely apart and serviced them so that you can see if you want to save a few dollars and buy these used, by all means do what I did. Take these apart and service them, and you can get them back to almost as good as new and inspect to see if there's any damage on them. So I hope you like this video, and the best way you can thank me is just hit that like button, hit subscribe if you want to see more content like this where I show you how to do DIY videos at home in your own garage, much like I have today. If you want to see more content on this Rexy, check out the other videos in the playlist above. But all in all, I just really hope this is useful for you, you know, that this is valuable, that you gain something from this, and that you can come back to this video anytime you like to follow along and install a set of these. And yeah, comment below and help the rest of the community install these as well by commenting below and adding any information that you think is valuable. But look, that's enough chit chat from me. I'm gonna let you go and yeah, just have a bit of fun. I'll catch you next time.